At the London Food Bank, we have a board meeting coming up near the end of June, and I thought to prepare the board for it, I would do a study of where the food situation is in Canada compared to what it was at this time last year. And things continue to change, but now there's a new dimension, and I thought we should talk about it because I think this has a real important impact on London. Stats Canada, for instance, has looked at how much, on the basis of 2026 food prices, how much a family of four in Canada spends on food annually. That number is $17,751.19. That's almost $20,000 a family of four is paying for food each year, and the number continues to go up by 4 or 5% a year. This is beginning to really raise questions, and I think it's important. We know that there are domestic issues, how we're going to deal with the difficulties about food and the price of food. I think that's very important. The federal government's recognized this as well. So what it did is it gave $760 million towards something they called the Food Accessibility Measure. Now, that was meant to help Canadian families. $670 million is a fair bit of money. The problem with it is that it went to food companies and others, grocery stores and others across the country. It didn't so much go to the shopper or the citizen or the family. It went towards those places that are bringing food to us. Only 3% of the money that the federal government gave goes towards local ventures within communities. So the problem is even though that money has gone out there and it's gone out to the various food delivery mechanisms, food producing and trade and everything else, the problem is the amount of food continues to go up as far as pricing goes. It's a real issue. And I think what's really changed it is the Straits of Hormuz. I know that might not fully make sense, but when it came out that Donald Trump, the American president, decided he was going to put tariffs on about a year ago when he said he would do that. I mean, we all sat back as people who are working and trying to help out for people that are hungry and said, okay, that's going to have an effect. It's going to cost more for food when those kind of things happen. I spent a lot of time talking to greenhouse vegetable growers associations, to grocery stores, to food companies and others to find out if they really believed that was going to happen. And they did. But what they couldn't say was just they couldn't give any real level of predictability to it. They didn't know if the president would change his mind next month or whatever. But what we've ended up happening is, sure enough, food prices were going up during that time. Nobody thought about what would happen if somebody went to war with Iran. And that is what has happened. And now what you're seeing is, because the Straits of Hormuz have been closed, because so much of our oil comes from there, but also the fertilizer that different countries use for growing food that goes into the global supply chain has really been cut back. We talk about the just-in-time grocery store model. We've become so used to it. I remember when I was a young boy in Calgary and the first grocery store opened up and we went to it, we couldn't believe all this food was coming into one place. I'll never forget that experience. But the just-in-time grocery model is the thing. Like all of a sudden, if we have needs, you just go down to the grocery store, whatever capacity is there, you get the food and you need, and then you come back. The thing about that is that the majority of food in the grocery store model that is especially fresh, they only have at any given time a 1 to 3 day supply of that food. Now, we saw a bit of that during the pandemic. If you remember, some of the shelves were going empty, but this is even worse with the Strait of Hormuz. So what it means is pretty soon we're going to run out of grocery options, of produce, vegetables, fruits, those kind of things. Those options are going to become far more limited as grocery stores are trying like mad to get the food to come in. That whole just-in-time model, the global supply chain, the food that comes from around the world and comes here, is really more and more at risk. So it wasn't just around tariffs. It really is around the Strait of Hormuz, the fertilizer, all of those things have happened. So just consider how dependent we have become on that just-in-time model. 80% of our fruit comes from the global supply chain, comes from outside of Canada and comes here. 60% of the vegetables, 30% of all food and beverages that we get actually comes from that global supply chain. So what happens when it runs up against the wall? And this is increasingly what's happening. So people are beginning to say now, okay, what do we do? And there's been a number of people who've been trying to say for some time, including ourselves at the food bank, is that grocery supply chain model, the global supply chain that has served us so well for decades and decades and decades since World War II, will still become the main option whereby we get our groceries. But what's beginning to happen now is that there's this sense of national security, not just here, but in Britain and in Europe and the United States, that it's one thing to lose oil supplies, let's say, but what happens about food supplies? When the things that are necessary, not just the food itself, but the nitrogen that goes into all of the fertilizers that go around the world, so much of that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. So after the terror thing came, we were saying it's time for us to start growing more and more of our own. People listened to that, but thought, well, Donald Trump will be gone at some point. Things will probably go back to normal. It'll be okay. But between the pandemic, the idea of the tariffs, and now this stuff about the Strait of Hormuz, how vulnerable our food supplies have become. Anything could go wrong at any particular time. And what it's doing to food is it's raising the price over and over again, quarter after quarter after quarter. And it's exceeding many Canadians' ability to be able to afford it. So we have to start looking at new ways of which we could grow in our own container farming and other things here in the region and also across the country. It's time we started growing our own, not just to beat tariffs, but this kind of vulnerability that we are left in because of things like the Straits of Hormuz. Then all of a sudden now we've got to realize that if we continue to depend on that model, pretty soon we won't be able to afford the food that it produces and brings to us. We have to start working on our own. That's part of the reason why the London Food Bank has been working with the London District Construction Association for the past 3 years to develop a container farm. It's going to be opening up soon and you'll hear more about it. But this is what they believe, especially the London District Construction Association. We have to start growing our own. We've been meeting with vegetable growers associations who are feeling the same. We have to start doing something in which all of these vulnerabilities that we're feeling from the system around the world, we need a strong alternative. So if those kind of things aren't going to work out because of violence or war or tariffs or whatever, then something is going to have to be done, and we're going to have to be able to provide for ourselves. The fact that Canadians are spending a family of four, spending over $17,500 a year for grocery supplies for his family, that really says something. We've got real challenges ahead for us. For food banks, an increasing amount of people that are coming to us are people that are working. And these people are trying to pay for rent, trying to put groceries on the table, that they don't have benefits often at work. So they've really got issues that they have to face. We have to start talking about it. And we will. Then as the container starts coming on side, especially in September, you'll see more about it here. But we have to think differently now. It's not if a president comes or goes anymore. We now realize in the global supply chain, we've had 3 threats to it just within the last decade, between the pandemic and between the tariffs, and now with the Strait of Hormuz problem. How many more are there out there that it's going to be an issue? We have to start providing food security for ourselves. And it's time for groups like City Council, even here in London, to say, what could we do to do that? This is some of the richest farmland in Ontario, in Canada, and in the world. Is there something that we could be doing now that could start to move towards that of becoming more self-sufficient? They're not spending enough time at it because they felt they haven't had to. As long as there was grocery stores and everything, it seemed fine. But now they're going to have to look at it. There are groups out there like the London District Construction Association and others who are willing to work with our city council to make that happen. But they have to start concentrating on it because we're having more and more people. 17,000 people a month are coming to the food bank just for help. That doesn't include the 40 other agencies that we also help. This is just going up and up and up, and we're all kind of shaking our heads and wondering when it's going to stop. It's not just that it's not going to stop or even level off. It's going to continue to go up until we find a way of supplying for ourselves. That's one of the things we need to have a look at. So here's a little video that we just put together quickly. It's only 5 or 6 minutes. It'll rehash what we've been talking about here and help us understand that this is what we're going to have to do as a community. And now that it's an election season in London, Ontario, we're going to need politicians and aspiring politicians who come to their community and say, look, we don't know all about the stuff that you folks do. You know about farming, you know about food and growing and all of those things. They need to bring a task force of those people together and find ways in which London can begin to grow its way out of its difficulties and begin to supply its own foods, local foods, for its own people. That used to be a charitable impulse before. Now it's really become an act of survival. If we wish to be able to continue to have food that we can afford, we can no longer depend just on that food system. We're going to have to find some way to provide a strong alternative. And that's where we're all wrong, and I think London's ready for it. Have a look at this video, and we'll talk more about the containers in a couple of months.
Okay, let's jump right in. $17,571.79. According to the RL Food Institute's 2026 report, that is the staggering projected grocery bill for an average family of 4 this year. I mean, that is an increase of nearly $1,000 from last year alone.
Section 1. The rising cost of food and the massive financial strain everyday citizens are experiencing right now in their own communities.
You know, it's incredibly easy to make assumptions about food insecurity, but the actual data completely shatters those preconceived notions. Food insecurity in Canada has climbed to a historic 24%. But here's the kicker. An alarming 20%, so that's 1 in 5 food bank clients, are actually employed. This isn't just a story about unemployment anymore. It's about a profound cost of living squeeze that's deeply affecting working families.
And why is this squeeze happening? Well, food inflation hit 3.5% in April of 2026. And remember, that's resting on top of years of compounded increases. When you combine that continuous inflation with really heavy fixed living costs like rent and wages that simply haven't kept pace, consumers are left incredibly vulnerable. Even minor price shifts at the grocery store can just devastate a household budget right now.
So, what is driving this? Section 2, geopolitics, fertilizer, and farms. Let's look at the hidden global variables driving up these costs.
The input costs for farmers have taken an absolutely massive leap. Old fertilizer prices used to sit somewhat comfortably between $500 and $700 per ton. The new reality? Over $1,300 per ton. Almost double. This staggering jump is heavily driven by international conflicts, notably the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Because making nitrogen fertilizer requires enormous heat and pressure derived from natural gas, while severing those global energy choke points directly and immediately spikes the cost of farming.
For the people actually growing our food, the impact is devastating. Alberta canola farmer Andre Harp literally calls it death by 1,000 cuts, and you can see why. Farmers aren't just dealing with sudden fertilizer spikes, they're struggling with astronomically high equipment costs, totally volatile global commodity markets, and domestic policies like the carbon tax. It all adds up to a massive financial strain on the people putting seeds in the ground.
And the impact actually varies depending on where you live. Eastern Canadian farmers deal with a compounded issue, a 35% tariff on Russian and Belarusian nitrogen imports. That specific policy has kept fertilizer costs elevated in Eastern Canada for years. But whether it's global market jumps in the West or long-standing tariffs in the East, the crucial takeaway here is that these supply chain issues inevitably raise your future grocery bills. When it costs more to grow wheat, corn, and feed, it is absolutely going to cost you more to buy meat, dairy, and bakery staples.
Which brings us to a critical pivot. Section 3. Food is national security. We need an empowering paradigm shift in how we view our food supply.
Think about this. 30% of all food and beverages are imported to Canada. That includes an incredible 80% of our fruit and 60% of our vegetables. This really highlights our heavy reliance on foreign imports and those global just-in-time distribution models. In a volatile era where geopolitical tensions are running high, this dependency exposes a severe vulnerability in our national resilience.
And the frightening reality of that vulnerability boils down to this: 1 to 3 days. That's it. That is the typical supermarket inventory limit. If global supply chains break down, whether that's due to border closures, energy disruptions, or international conflict, a local supermarket only has enough food in its backrooms to support its community for up to 72 hours.
So what's the solution? Well, it requires redefining how we look at our own backyards. Community food systems must be viewed as critical multi-use infrastructure. They are essential to civilian well-being, economic opportunity, and national security. We really need to stop viewing local food networks as some sort of charitable afterthought and start treating them as vital infrastructure that protects a nation's sovereignty from the ground up.
But we have a major disconnect right now in how we actually fund this. Consider the recent $670 million federal food access pledge. A massive 97% of that funding is directed straight to industrial production and conventional grocery retail. Only 3% goes to community food sector infrastructure. 3%. It really highlights the urgent need to invest much more heavily in local resilient food networks if we actually want to secure our supply chains.
Let's zoom back into the micro level. Section 4, building local food hubs and the practical, community-driven solutions making a difference.
If you want to build a local food hub, here's a highly effective roadmap distilled from organizations like Local Line and The Grocer. Step 1. Stay flexible and adapt your model based on what your specific community actually needs. Step 2. Secure grants and funding early on to build a solid foundation. Step 3. Build strong local partnerships with farmers and businesses to share the heavy logistical load of storage and distribution. And Step 4. Set up Food Hub software early to automate operations. That saves hours of manual work so you can actually focus on scaling the project.
And we're already seeing amazing real-world examples of these steps in action. The Gitmax Macgai Nisagaha Society used a 40-foot hydroponic unit to overcome land constraints, and now they provide year-round produce and local jobs for their citizens. Or look at the Churchill Northern Study Center. They're utilizing a modular container farm to foster consistent community engagement in a really harsh climate. These communities are taking direct control of their food supply year-round, totally regardless of global shipping delays.
Skyrocketing costs, the fragile global supply chains, and some incredibly powerful local solutions. Now I want to end with a provocative question for you to seriously think about. In a volatile world, who controls your food? The answer to that question, whether it's an international conglomerate thousands of miles away or the farmers and food hubs in your own backyard, is going to define your community's readiness and our collective future.